and welcome to the First Alert Desk here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Maria Moreau with none other than Dan Wisenhunt with Decatur Dish. Decatur.com covers all of the latest happenings out in DeKalb County. You guys are very involved and immersed with this community, so thank you for joining us here at Atlanta News First Plus. Dan, this is episode 2 now of Decatur Dish. It's a segment that you and I started as a way to get people caught up and informed on what's going on in DeKalb County. But before we get into that, for the people that might be watching this for the first time, what is Decatur-ish?
What is Decatur-ish? So philosophical. Decatur-ish is a local news website. We are based in Decatur, Georgia. We cover Decatur, Avondale Estates, Kirkwood, Tucker, Clarkston, Metro Atlanta, if there's an angle there. So we're hyper local, but we're not myopic. So we'll cover things that are outside of our area, if it makes sense. But we publish every day a week, primarily Monday through Friday, and we are always on top of things, try to stay on top of the local news and keep everybody informed about what's happening with their government and what's happening in their community. So that's our deal.
And Decatur Dish is a digital segment. It is basically a way to get people caught up on the latest happenings out in DeKalb County, dishing out those news headlines. So I want to dive into this first one here, known as the Cottage Court Project. This is out in Decatur, a city-developed project that is supposed to bring affordable housing to that area. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So Decatur has been grappling with the housing affordability issue for a really long time, as long as our website has existed, and before that, teardowns are a thing that happens where people go in and buy this older housing stock and tear it down and redevelop it as something new and expensive and unaffordable. So way back in 2015, Decatur envisioned this Cottage Court project, which is, these are smaller homes between 500 and 1,200 square feet. They all share a green space, and the idea is to create these and make them permanently affordable housing stock that is going to be marketed directly to city employees who usually don't make enough money to afford a home in the city of Decatur, where your barrier to entry is usually around $1 million, maybe $500,000 if you're lucky and find a really good deal.
And this is a picture I pulled off of Decatur.com, by the way. This is one of those homes that really could change a lot of people's lives. We talk about this. It sounds pretty ambitious. What has taken this so long to get off the ground?
Well, there's no money in it, which is really the big hurdle to any development. I mean, if there were a lot of profit to be made, it would have been done yesterday. But it's a city-developed affordable housing project, so that's going to take some time. The big issue was they had to talk with GDOT because the property is actually, it's on Commerce Drive, and it's technically a state road, so they had to talk with GDOT about some ingress and egress issues there. Construction costs have gone up, as everyone knows, along with inflation, so the cost has gone up, but it looks like they're finally going to start opening these up. It's going to be opened, the first few are going to be opened by the end of this year, and there are going to be a couple that'll be opened, the rest will be open next year. It'll be about 6 homes, and it'll be, it's really a dent in the overall affordability equation in Decatur, but, one of the things that Decatur has now that they didn't have when they started this project is a mandatory inclusionary zoning ordinance, which means that if you come in and you're a private developer and you build a new mixed-use project, you have to set aside a certain percentage of those homes as affordable. So Decatur has made some strides and policy changes along the way in its affordable housing strategy, I would say.
Yeah, and we're going to continue to follow that on
Absolutely.
AtlantaNewsFirst.com. I know you guys are following it closely on Decatur.com.
Absolutely. Been following it since day one, so we'll keep following it.
All right, I want to move on to our second headline here. A big conversation around mental health reform, especially out in DeKalb County. We actually recently here on Atlanta News First talked about officer-involved training to address crises involving mental health and that sort of response. Before we get into this next headline, I want to send it over to our reporter, Madeline Montgomery, who actually followed some of the latest efforts that are being made.
20% of 911 calls involve someone going through a mental health crisis, according to the American Psychological Association. That's why APD's chief says that it's so important for officers and firefighters to be here this week to learn how to identify a mental health crisis and how to de-escalate it. Just last month, an Atlanta police officer saved a man going through a mental health crisis who was threatening to jump from an overpass sign. The officer credited his training with knowing how to respond. Atlanta police officers train in mental health as much as they do with how to use their firearm.
We need to create more opportunities for access to care. But for those who are faced with the challenge of being a frontline responder and having to identify that situation so they know how to properly refer, requires training.
Training like today's also helps prevent violence. According to a report by the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, people with untreated mental illness are 16 times more likely than the average civilian to be killed during police contact. That's the last thing APD's chief wants to see.
It's important for us because as we protect the 245 neighborhoods of Atlanta, we want to have compassion and care for every citizen that we encounter. And when you're a department that last year alone responded over 9,000 mental health emergencies right here in the city, this training is key to that. Last year of those 9,000, less than 1% required an arrest and less than 1% required any type of force to be able to bring that person into custody.
Atlanta police officers are required to go through 40 hours of crisis training. Reporting in Atlanta, I'm Madeline Montgomery, Atlanta News First.
All right, so that was our Madeline Montgomery talking about some of the efforts from law enforcement to improve response. Mental health is such a big part of our community and what we're striving to, as Madeline mentioned, law enforcement now looking at this issue more closely. I want to move things back to DeKalb County, though. Just recently, DeKalb's delegation held a town hall that really pushed mental health care reform, and a lot of those legislators mentioned that this was going to be big for 2024.
Yeah, so our DeKalb delegation held a town hall meeting to kind of give people a preview of what's going to come up in the session. Thomas Wheatley over at Axios moderated it, and we covered it, of course. And they made a point to say that mental health care reform is going to get another hearing this year. Last year, House Bill 520 did not make it out of the House. It passed the House, but it didn't get passed in the Senate. That bill would have increased funding for things like, social workers and community responders, and to try to break this cycle that people with mental illness have, where they kind of bounce between the streets and jail without actually getting treatment for their illnesses.
And, that treatment is such an important part, not just for those individuals, but for the community and having a support system like that. What do you hope to see as you expect to continue to follow this next legislative session?
Well, I think the legislative delegation is going to take that bill and break it up into smaller bills, probably take the more popular parts of that legislation and try to get it passed that way. The price tag on the bill last year was $72 million, so that was something that people had concerns about. There was also some horse trading going on, frankly, between the House and the Senate over a separate bill related to hospital permitting that kind of delayed it. There's a thing that happens in the legislature where even bills that have broad popular support can meet their demise because of reasons that have nothing to do with that bill. And sometimes anything that is broad and comprehensive is going to take some time to get across the finish line. I know State Rep Mary Margaret Oliver is very passionate about this issue and dedicated to making this happen, so I do expect that there will be a significant push for it next year. And you know what? It's needed. I mean, Georgia is dead last in mental health care in every significant poll on that topic. It's been a problem for a long time. Too often people who have a mental illness wind up in jail first, and that's not going to be the place where they get the best treatment. So this is really about increasing funding for those services and breaking this cycle and getting people the care that they absolutely need. I don't think there's anybody watching that has not had some brush either personally with mental illness, or somebody who's had a mental illness that's gone untreated. And it sort of piles up on itself if you don't treat it quickly and promptly. And there are people who have had mental illnesses that have been untreated for years, and this is what this bill is trying to address. And the delegation hopes that by breaking these bills up, that they'll have a better chance of getting that passed in the next session. So we'll see what happens there.
We will. And, we talked about some important topics: affordable housing, mental health care. This next one, addressing the unhoused, homelessness, specifically in Tucker. And Tucker now considering a partnership with the DeKalb Community Service Board to address the needs of unhoused residents. What's going on with that?
Well, we're starting to see a theme here, right? With mental health care, with housing affordability, we're starting to see how all of these things kind of link up. And in Tucker, they're talking with the DeKalb Community Service Board, I want to get that right, who would provide a dedicated social worker to help people who are having a mental health crisis. And this is one of the things that the legislation we talked about previously is trying to address, because when cities need this kind of help, they're often turning to nonprofit organizations and other sort of stopgap measures to deal with the problems that are going on. So there's an attempt to make sure that the first person these folks see is not necessarily a police officer, but a mental health advocate, some kind of social worker who can diagnose and maybe connect them with resources that they need. Tucker, it has its share of unhoused residents. A lot of people in places in DeKalb County do, and that's only gotten worse as housing has become less affordable, unfortunately.
And as we continue talking about the latest headlines out of DeKalb County, I want to move to one that really made news both here in Atlanta and as we saw on Decatorish.com. This map that I'm showing you here, this is Blackman Drive and Scott Boulevard, and this stretch of road has been a problem, as some residents have stated. We actually reported, Decatorish as well, another pedestrian was hit there recently, and that coming almost a year after a similar fatal pedestrian crash. What is it about this road, Dan?
Well, it's a very wide road. It has a very high speed limit. It's 45, but as readers probably are aware, enforcement, it only happens if you're 10 miles over the limit. So effectively, you could say the speed limit is 55 miles an hour on that stretch of road. Getting hit in a crosswalk at that rate of speed, it's a very bad outcome for the person who gets hit. Thankfully, the person who was hit last week only had minor injuries. Driver stayed on the scene. I don't anticipate there will be any charges or anything issued as a result of that. But a year ago, almost to the day, there was a fatal pedestrian crash at Scott and Blackman. And it's a road that's been identified as a problem here in DeKalb County.
And as we talk about this road, I'm sure this conversation has come up. Is there anything that can be done to address something like this?
Well, there's been talk. Rebecca Cerna with Propel ATL mentioned that section of road could really benefit from a pedestrian island. You're looking at 5 lanes of traffic to cross Scott Boulevard, and we continue to build mixed-use developments in DeKalb County, and we invite people to live, work, and play in those developments, but we don't always provide the pedestrian infrastructure that's necessary to support that. And I think Blackman is a good case in point. They built all of this expensive housing, they built all of this retail around it, and their solution to pedestrian infrastructure was to put a very long crosswalk across Scott Boulevard. And if you drive that stretch of road on a regular basis, which I do, that crosswalk kind of sits at the top of a hill. So depending on the lighting, you might not even see that until you get right up on it. So there definitely needs to be some reconsideration of how that intersection, that area is aligned. Michelle Long Spears, the county commissioner, said there's a study going on right now to identify potential solutions. The young woman who died a year ago, her mother has been a very passionate advocate for her daughter and trying to get some improvements to this intersection, to this area, so something like this won't happen again.
And we'll continue to follow any developments that come out of there. Hopefully,
Absolutely.
that victim is making a recovery as we're talking about this now. All right, this next part of our show, from my personal favorite, the talk of the town. These are the stories that we've seen you guys talking about on social media. It has a lot of people weighing in, giving their opinions. This is the Avondale Road Diet Project. It's quite a name, but a big story that you guys put out on Decatur-ish. I'm going to pull that up for you right here. As you can see, Zoe Seller writing this one up, but a big development for this area for DeKalb County. For those that are unfamiliar with this proposal, this construction efforts, what should they know about this?
Well, they should know that the city of Avondale Estates doesn't want me to call it a road diet, to which I said that's very cute. That's what we'll continue calling it because that's what it is. It's not like 278, woke up one day and looked at itself in the mirror and decided it needed to make some changes, adjust its diet a little bit. 278 is the main drag through Avondale Estates. It's North Clarendon Avenue and East College, and for all intents and purposes, it's the main street. Have you driven through that area, Maria? You know what I'm talking
I'll
about?
be honest, I have not driven through that area. I Google Maps it this morning.
Well, everybody should visit Avondale. It's a great town. The 278 portion of that road is more of a pass-through, and the idea and this, like the Cottage Court project, has been talked about since 2014. And there's been studies and workshops, and we're finally getting to a point on it where we can let those contracts. So the plan is to reduce those lanes from 5 to 3 to slow traffic and give people a reason to stop and shop and support businesses in Avondale. Typically, 278 has been a revenue generator for all the wrong reasons because police officers have been waiting on the side of the road to catch speeders, and the city's been overly dependent on that as a revenue stream. So this project serves multiple goals. It's going to make that area safer for people to walk. It's going to hopefully convince people to stop and slow down and support those businesses. And it's also going to diversify the city's revenue stream so they won't be so dependent on ticketing by its police department, which is one of their stated goals, is to make their police department a little notorious for running a speed trap.
And, as we continue to monitor this, hearing it finally coming to this development after taking so long to just get off the ground, this bid, really pushing this along. I know you guys will follow it closely, and we'll have that for you on AtlantaNewsFirst.com. I want to talk about probably the most important news story that we could talk about for any DeKalb County resident, and that is voting. I'm going to pull up Decatur-ish once again. If you haven't been keeping up, Decatur-ish has a complete voter's guide, as do we, because we want you to be informed and get out and vote. Early voting is underway right now, and Dan, I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell the people yourself how important it is to make their voice heard.
Got to give my speech. I feel like a social studies teacher. I do this every week, but go vote. It's silly if you don't vote. You've got plenty of information at your disposal. There are plenty of websites. There's our website. There are other resources out there. We've done forums. There's really no excuse. The early voting does continue this week. The elections are on November 7th. Wanted to talk a little bit as we get into the primary season. We're going to have the Democratic primary next year, which is going to be a big deal in DeKalb County because most of the elected officials are Democrats, so that's the de facto election there. The Elections Board recently sent out and then retracted a survey to poll managers asking them what their party affiliation was. One of the members of the Elections Board said she was interested in learning more about the party affiliations, and I guess a member of the Elections Department took that as the go-ahead to send out the survey. The survey got forwarded to me. I started asking questions about it. A few hours later, no more survey. So the survey's gone. But DeKalb County is one of those areas that is a big part of not only politics in Georgia, but nationally. We are part of that blue wall. When people talk about Georgia being a purple state now, DeKalb and Fulton are the reasons behind that. So as the elections move forward, you can fully, and especially with the presidential election, you can expect to see a lot more focus on DeKalb County, and that's one of the reasons we've invested resources into covering the elections board, because we know that if something does happen, if there's a dispute over an election result, DeKalb County might be one of those places where it gets hashed out. So it's important for us to stay apprised of what's going on. Another thing people might not be aware of is there's a new state law that makes it easier to challenge voter residency. We've seen a number of these challenges come up and be summarily rejected by the elections board in recent weeks. That's just something to keep an eye on. The representation of the elections board is divided between the parties, Democrat and Republican, and there's a nonpartisan chair, and in every case the board has voted mostly along party lines to reject those voter challenges, mainly because they feel they don't have sufficient evidence or it exceeds their mandate. But voting challenges can be brought, people might not realize this, but even homeless people have the ability to vote, and sometimes they're not going to have a permanent address, so they will need a P.O. box or something along those lines. So there's a real attempt to target individuals who are probably the people who need to be protected the most when it comes to their right to vote, and that's something that has been brought forth a number of times to the elections board, and the elections board has pushed back on it every time. I imagine that will continue, but I do think it's important to pay attention to what this elections board does. If there's a problem, if there's a dispute about an election in Georgia, the first place it's probably going to happen is in Fulton, but I would say the second place would be DeKalb County. And so that's why we invest so much of our time and resources into keeping an eye on this board and keeping the public apprised of what this board does, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Yeah, and just as a recap, if you really need to know the important dates, early voting going on right now, November 7th. That's the big day, and you guys have a bunch of links on what you need to do between now and then, or on November 7th if you prefer to vote traditionally. Walk me through this website real quick before we move on to our next story.
I might need you to walk me through my website at this point. We need an overhaul. DecaturishVotes.com. It's going to link to all of our elections coverage. It's going to have a link to our voter's guide. Most importantly, if you go to our Facebook page, that voter's guide is also pinned. If you go to locallysourcednews.com and sign up for our email list, we're promoting that dang voter's guide in every email we have put out. And yet we still get emails from people saying, "Where's your voter's guide? I can't find it." Well, other than beaming it into space, I don't know how to help people get to it. But I will say it again: go to DecaturishVotes.com. All of your elections coverage is there. And if you have any questions, if you feel like there's something we haven't explained adequately, just email me, editor@Decaturish.com. We'll try to help you get the answers you're looking for, so you can make an informed choice on November 7th.
There is literally no excuse not to vote.
It really isn't. No, and people died for this, and I don't have to go through the whole spiel, do I? Go vote. Go vote, people.
One thing I did want to say on your website, I mean, a lot of people have those little questions. What do I bring? I'm going to drive down there. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to have to make a trip back home. You guys really answer all of that. You have links to where people can find their polling place, what they need to bring with them, how they can learn more about the candidates that they're going to be choosing. So a lot of good info. Decaturish.com, as you mentioned, is the website, and we're going to continue to follow all of this pretty much each day through the election, through November 7th and beyond.
Yep, as will we. The local elections are like our Super Bowl, so we're all about it. So
Yes, we are.
follow us on Election Day for your election results.
All right. This is the final story, the spotlight on the community, and such an important thing to wrap this show up with, because what we want to do with this is not only highlight what's going on in DeKalb County, but highlight the people that make DeKalb County so special. And this story melted my heart. I mean, this is, as you can see, just such a feel-good story, so well written. And as the title explains, this is about a beloved employee who aimed to keep a children's home legacy alive, and that is him right there.
It's Dorsey.
Dorsey Nobles, none other than Dorsey Nobles.
Zoe Seiler wrote that story, and she did a tremendous job with it. Zoe has a lot of heart, and she, you can tell, she brought her A game to that story, and did a terrific job. It got all kinds of shares and reposts there. Do you know anything about the United Methodist Children's Home, Maria? Do you know anything?
I read up on it, but I want for those that are unfamiliar with this story, I mean, this is really a tribute to how special DeKalb County is, a rich history behind that Methodist church, if you wouldn't mind getting into it.
No, not at all. The United Methodist Children's Home was actually started in the 1870s as an orphanage for Civil War orphans, and it's out there on South Columbia Drive. Back in 2016, 2017, the United Methodist Children's Home was looking to sell that property. There was some suggestion that it could become another big, giant, mixed-use development, which, as we've discussed in a previous show, it's not always the most popular option. The city of Decatur stepped in 2017 and ponied up $40 million to buy it. So now they're kind of like the dog that caught the bus. So they've got the bus. They're trying to figure this out. They spent a lot of money to buy the property, and now they got to figure out how to maintain it and keep it up to speed. They've got a lot of nonprofits out there right now. But one of the people that they depend on very heavily to maintain that property is a guy who knows the property really well, because he grew up there. He was a resident of the United Methodist Children's Home. Him and his siblings were there, and so he grew up there. He's been affiliated with the property for 50 some odd years. He got to know Bev Cochran, who was the former head of the children's home there. He left for a little while and then came back and was working at the property when the city bought it. And so when the city bought it, they offered him a job, and so he came along with the property, and he does work for the Public Works Department, and works on that property every day, and everyone just loves this guy. He's the sweetest man, never met a stranger, just super duper human being. And there are a lot of people who read that story who were saying, finally, this person has gotten his due. And really just a great community story, and the kind of thing that we get up every day and love to do. So I encourage you to check that out on Decatorish.com. Just Google Dorsey Nobles and Decatorish.com, or look it up on the website, and you should be able to find it. But terrific story by Zoe, and it's well worth your time to read.
And I think everybody loves the story of the underdog, or someone passionate about something that they grew up around that is so close and personal to them, and then that passion translating in the way that we saw this play out. I mean, this is a story that really pulls on your heartstrings. So very well done. Yeah. All right, thank you for joining us here at Atlanta News First Plus. Thank you to Decatur-ish Dan for joining us as we highlight some of the stories and happenings in DeKalb County, a little beyond Metro Atlanta. I'm going to change my graphic here. If you enjoyed Decatur Dish, we are going to have episodes for you every week on Tuesday at 12:30, so you can tune in live, send in your questions. We monitor all of that. But in between that, we want to keep you updated on the latest that's going on. Where can people find more headlines like these?
Well, Decatorish.com is your first stop. Locally sourced news.com is where you can sign up for our mailing list. That's a great way to keep up with the stories we publish every day. SupportYourLocalNews.com is a place where you can go to support us financially. But to see our show on Atlanta News First, you're going to need to download that app. Yes. The Atlanta News First Plus app is where you're going to go to see episodes of this show and other great shows that the A&F team is putting out. So we're encouraging all of our readers, the people who are supporters of Decatur-ish, to get that app on your phone, get it on Roku, and start keeping up with our partners at Atlanta News First. They're doing great work, and they're helping us to keep you informed in the long term.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all of you for tuning in. Yes, download the app. It's the easiest way to stay up to date on your headlines. We send push alerts directly to your phone. And check out DecaturIsh.com for all your DeKalb County news headlines. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.